Joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton. Good morning, Senator. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hey, Hugh. Great to be on with you.
You led the fight against the JCPOA, the doomed Obama deal with Iran that was so bad for the world, so bad for America. The Europeans loved it, but finally it appears in a joint statement by the foreign ministers of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom today that the JCPOA is now dead in Europe as well.
Yeah, Hugh, very big news coming from Europe this morning. A centerpiece of my strategy going back 5 years and the Trump administration strategy going back the last 2 years has been to reimpose the sanctions that Barack Obama foolishly lifted to try to buy Iran's cooperation back in 2015. The Europeans have resisted that, but given that Iran continues to try to make progress on its nuclear weapons program and to slaughter its own people in the street as they protest that regime's corruption, malevolence, and incompetence, the Europeans just announced this morning that they're going to start down the path that could lead to the triggering of the so-called snapback sanctions against Iran. So if that is the result, that'll be a big victory for the Trump administration, a big victory for America, and hopefully for the cause of peace and stability in the Middle East.
It is my belief that this regime in Tehran is very fragile, Senator Cotton. I believe that for 30 years. They've been at war with us for 40. And I believe that additional pressure may cause it to fall. Do you share my optimism that the people of Iran are sick and tired of the mullahs stealing their money and imposing their radical theology upon them?
Absolutely, Hugh. You can see that in the protests, not just over the last few days from the corruption and the incompetence that led to the shoot down of that Ukrainian civilian aircraft, but also the protests from a couple months ago that were as much about economic mismanagement and Iran's imperial overstretch in the Middle East, which has the Iranian people's money going to support terror proxy groups in places like Yemen and Syria and Hezbollah. These protests go back years, though, too, Hugh. And I can tell you that although the protests may not be constant and ongoing because of the regime's police state techniques, the causes for those protests have never gone away. The Iranian people are right to be fed up and sick and tired of the corruption and malevolence of the Ayatollahs. If there's one thing we learned from the period of 1989 to 1992 is that authoritarian regimes seem to be permanent until the moment they're not.
Now let me turn to Apple. You have previously been deeply concerned with Apple's refusal to cooperate with the United States government in the aftermath of the San Bernardino massacre. It appears now that they are not assisting the Department of Justice in opening the terrorist phone who attacked and killed sailors in Pensacola. Do we need a law that requires Apple to either give us cooperation or get out of the business of selling to the United States government?
Yeah, Hugh, if tech companies like Apple and others in Silicon Valley don't start doing more to cooperate with law enforcement and our intelligence agencies to try to stop threats to our communities and to our country, then I think we need to consider such a law. In Pensacola, Apple says, well, we've helped get access to iCloud, but that's only because it's in our possession. But you've got this iPhone. Lord knows what's stored on the iPhone locally, and we're not going to do that. Now, with San Bernardino shooter, the FBI was able to get into his iPhone through a third-party vendor, which suggests Apple may not be quite so skilled and competent in protecting its users' data as they'd like to make themselves out to be. It would be a lot easier, though, if Apple would just cooperate with law enforcement. Hugh, as you know, we have a law that requires telephone companies to cooperate with law enforcement. You cannot create a telephone system in this country that is immune from court-authorized, and that's important, court-authorized wiretaps. If companies like Apple and its sister companies in Silicon Valley don't start cooperating more with law enforcement, we may need a similar law for tech companies.
Now, I have seen you personally spark it up with tech executives from your position as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and it seemed to me at that exchange an obliviousness to the threat that on that phone might be a lead to another terrorist. That's it. I mean, it's just so obvious to me. Is it not obvious to them?
It seems not to be. Sometimes I think that the tech boardrooms in Silicon Valley may be the only place more out of touch with the rest of America than the Congress in Washington, D.C. But it's more than that, Hugh. It's that they're not cooperating with law enforcement in our country to try to stop terrorists or child pornographers or what have you, yet they will do anything to maintain access to the Chinese market. brutal police state that is imprisoning millions of its own citizens in a gulag. It's time that we put an end to that. It would be better if these tech companies do it on their own as good corporate citizens of American companies, not global companies, not multinational companies, but American companies that have benefited from America's laws and America's workforce and America's property rights. If they would do it on their own. If not, then we may have to do it for them.
Now, Senator Cotton, one final question, and I'll have to play it next hour. We'll go into the break here. The question of witnesses has arisen. I am agnostic. I will leave it to the majority of the Senate to decide whether or not witnesses ought to be called. That's the constitutional way. However, as a lawyer, as a con law professor, I believe in due process. And that means to me, if the prosecutors, the House managers, get to be first mover to call a witness, then the president obviously gets to call a witness, and they get the opportunity to be first mover for the second witness, which obviously would be, I think, one or both of the Bidens and or a whistleblower. What do you think about the witness question and due process?
Well, most remarkably, Hugh, it seems like the prosecutors are getting cold feet and want us to do their homework for them. You know, they move with such lightning speed. Back in September, October, November, they said they couldn't even be bothered to go to court and challenge any of the witnesses who didn't want to come testify in front of them. Now they get over here and they expect us to do our work for them. What I can tell your listeners is, however the question of witnesses shakes out, the president will get a fair shake in the Senate, unlike what he did in the House. There may be disagreements among the senators about who should be called specifically to testify, but there is no disagreement, I can assure you, at least among 53 Republicans, that the president should get a fair shake on witnesses and on every other question.
And, Senator, do you consider a fair shake what I have described, one for one, first mover for first mover, which means either you get 4 witnesses or no witnesses? That's my view.
That is one possible approach, Hugh. There are others that are under debate. I can just assure you and all your listeners that it will not be a one-sided proceeding where only the Democrats have a chance to even attempt to call witnesses.
Do you believe your caucus is united in the principle of due process for the president when it comes to witnesses?
No doubt about that, Hugh.
So it will not just be John Bolton and nobody else?
I can't imagine that scenario.
Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Hugh.